This video is an extension of a previous one, which was an extension of a previous one before that. I have a simple SQLAlchemy database, which has a single table for the planets. It has the name of the planet, a distance from the sun, and a period around the sun, and an ID, which is the primary key. That's all that's in here. And so I have a file here, a Python file that is defining this planet class, which is going to connect to the planets table in a database. And then I am going to use this load code. So that was all just definitions. And now here is this load code, which is going to read a CSV file and read in my planets. So let me run that. Okay, so that should be done. Now I'm going to have a quick peek at it. I'm going to open up my command palette. I have a SQLite Alex CSVV or CVZZ something. And I can view, there's my data inside. So I've loaded up the data. And then I have a file that just quickly does a query of that table and spits it out here in the terminal. Fine. Now we're bringing in Flask in routes. And I have a default route that gets redirected to just a plain HTML table. Here is the so that was the default route being redirected, and here is that route that I'm redirected to, which generates just an HTML table. And I showed that before. And then I directed it to a table that had some extra JavaScript code. So it was connecting to what was called a data table. And that data table library in turn used the jQuery JavaScript library. It's a nice library, but a bit old. And I've shown that in a previous video. And then I wanted to do something a little more modern. So I am doing a Gridjs. So here is the Gridjs site. And I also followed a bit of this, and I have the URL for this in the file, and I'll try to put the files so that you can have them as well. Okay, so the other two were had some similarity in that you in this first one, I just make a table. And then in this other one, I still make the table and I add a little bit of JavaScript. And then the table begins to have this functionality. Let me run it and show what that functionality is. So I'm running the route page. And let me get my URL. There we are to control click on. And this is the table page. So I just have the table. And in this, I have the two versions. And one, I just specified I wanted ID, name, period, and distance. I sort of controlled it. And here I did more of a discovery. Tell me what you've got. There is a field related, because I'm not directly connecting to the database and querying it myself. I'm using SQLAlchemy. There is a field with this column key value pair, this key, and I don't want that. So I want to see the actual data in the data table. So when I'm doing the sort of discovery approach, there's this thing I'm throwing out. Anyway, okay. So we saw that before, then I moved over to the data table, and here is the functionality gotten by the data table that it has pagination, though I have such a small, only 9 planets, you don't really get to see the pagination, but it gives me a sorting, and it gives me searching. Okay. So now I want to move over to the grid table, and it gives me, here's just a sort of more or less hard-coded data table up at the top. That's the example from the Gridjs IO page. And then here's my table. And again, it gives the pagination, though it's a small, and the sorting. If there was searching, I didn't get that far. So, okay. So that's what I want to show you. Now, let's look behind the scenes here. So let's right click and view the page source. And this is mainly a table with lots of extra space in here, but this is an HTML table with some jQuery and data table code using CDNs to give it that functionality. Whereas when I go to Gridjs, this newer version, I get the same functionality, but if I look behind the scenes, it's much less HTML and much more JavaScript. So the data comes in JavaScript, and then JavaScript is generating the table. So it's a different approach, sort of not here's a table and add, which a lot of the work was in making the HTML. Here, most of the work is in making the JavaScript. So I'm going to have pass the data over. I'm going to formulate the data as I want in Python, pass it, and then pass it over, and then have sort of some Jinja do it. But my Jinja is going to be more within JavaScript, within the script tags, rather than the previous one where the data was passed over and the Jinja was in HTML. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so we're interested in this last route, the planet_gridjs route. And we saw that the format it likes is it wants the names of the columns. So here was the example I stole from the Gridjs page, and they want these columns and then the data. So this was in Python language a list, in JavaScript language an array. So there was an array of strings, and then this was in JavaScript language an array of arrays, in Python language a list of lists. So we have here this array and then an array of arrays. Okay, so that's the format that we want. So now I want to get query my database in SQLAlchemy and then get it into the format that into this format. Now I worked in a format where I queried the database and I put it into I did this list comprehension that you see here in 20, and I got a list of dictionaries. So I'm going to now work with that list of dictionaries to get the list of columns and the list of lists for the data. And then I'm going to pass those two things. So in the previous two examples, I was passing what I called result dict, that list of dictionaries over, but now I'm going to manipulate that and send over the two things at once. Okay, so here I'm going to create columns and data. And what I want out of columns is a list of strings, which are the column names. So I have this result dict, which is a list of dictionaries. I'm taking the first item, just the 0th item in that list. So that would be probably Mercury, and it's a dictionary. And then I'm grabbing the keys. So that's going to be ID and name and distance and period. the key values, that not the key, but the keys of the dictionary. Okay. And I only want that once. That's why I have the 0 here. There is the weird SQLAlchemy key that I don't want to see. That's just behind the scenes stuff. I don't want to see that, so I am removing it. I printed it out to make sure I could see it in my terminal. Then it had the right form, but I should really get rid of that or comment it out. And so I had columns in the right format. Now let me get the data in the right format. So I have created here in 52 a list. Then I am looping through the results dictionary. And I decided to call each element, I decided to call it a record. And I created, like I did here, I got a list. I got the keys and converted it to a list. Here I'm getting the values and converting it to a list. I have the same issue here of there was that weird SQLAlchemy. Here was the key. I know what the key looks like, but I also have to get rid of the corresponding value. And what I did here was it happens to be like the first one. So I said top 0, that got rid of it for me. And then I appended, so I took a record, got the values from that record, got rid of the SQLAlchemy stuff, and then added that list to my overall list. So I got a list of lists. And again, I printed that to make sure I had the right format. Now I'm doing my render template of Flask. I'm going over to Planet Gridjs. I give it a title, I give it a header, and here is me passing the data. I'm going to call it columns, but I got this thing called columns, and then I call it columns as I pass it. The same thing for data. I got this list of lists of data, and I'm giving it the name data as I pass it over. And I'm going to planet_grid.js, so I have to find that, planet_grid.js. And this uses, this calls on Gridjs layout. So we should have a peek at that before we go too far and I forget about it, Grid.js layout. And this is where I have the CDN. So here I have a script that has the Gridjs CDN. And then this is my style sheet that I made, and then their style sheet. And the order of the style sheets mattered a bit here, because with my style sheet and their style sheet in the other order, I ended up writing like with white writing on white background. So I was making some writing, and they were making some white background, and that didn't work so well. So I switched the order, and then it was more reasonable. I get some of my style, but more of their styling, and it worked out nicely that way. Okay. I have some navigation to get from my various versions of the table and data table and Gridjs table. So, but that's it. But the main thing here was this CDN, the CDN, and then the style for the CDN for the Gridjs. Not going to work without that. Okay, back to the Planet Gridjs. Okay, so I'm in the layout. I put in the title. I put in the header. Here's my content. I make a container which is going to hold a table. This is the way that Gridjs works. It's sort of like React and Vue and things like that, where you make a container and then you have JavaScript generate some stuff and put it in a container. So it's very sort of more modern JavaScript in that it's like React and Vue in this sense. And so here is new Gridjs grid. And it wants this column and it wants this data. This is just the, not completely hard-coded, but more hard-coded version of the, at least the data is hard-coded. And then you use render, and then you say where you want to render it. So I want to render it on the page in a container called target, and I made that there. And now here is my second one. Now, this is, I've got Jinja within JavaScript. So this is looking a lot funky here, but I can do in Visual Studio Code, I can give it half a chance and select my language mode. So I'm going to click on here. I have an extension loaded up that's called Better Jinja. And that gives me a bunch of various on Jinja. And here's a Jinja JavaScript. And it cleaned it up a bit because now it understands both HTML and JavaScript and Jinja. And so it understands this notation better. So we got rid of the squigglies. Okay. Now here is my new Gridjs grid, just comparing that to above. Sorry about that. So that was the same. Now columns, here's my Jinja, curly columns. And I'm bringing over some code from Flask. So Python and Flask are making my columns and sending it over, and I'm using Jinja to insert it on this page. And so when you are doing something, when you're sending over HTML code or JavaScript code or anything like that, it wants to be safe and it will like interpret. So it will take any quotation marks and turn them into code for quotation marks rather than directly quotation marks. But if you do this safe, if you say what's coming over is okay and you don't have to do that, then you get what you want here. So you don't want it to sort of strip out, introduce characters. You want whatever comes over, you want as it was generated, and not we don't want any escape sequences or what have you. So that's what the safe is doing for you here. So here's the word columns, and here's the data using Jinja to getting the data that was passed over, and do it in this add this pipe safe so that it doesn't get messed up by this idea to be sort of like almost unsafe. It's the stopping the stuff that it usually does to be safe is what this really does for us. And the same thing for data here. And then to actually get the functionality that I wanted, we can say pagination is true. You can do fancier stuff, and this link, the YouTube video, he was showing some fancier stuff than just true. Like you can control how many elements are on a page before you go to other pages. I just said true. But he shows how to do that. And also we made it that you could sort the columns. And again, that link was showing sort of a fancier way where you could control which columns allowed sorting. And then the rendered document, I have another container up here with an ID of target too. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you, a sort of more modern data table, getting a more modern data table. That gives me some of this pagination and sorting. I don't know about searching. I'll have to look into that. I forgot to do that. With a more modern library, Gridjs. And again, it has this more Vue React kind of interaction. And then when we were working with the Python, so there was this, where was my route? I had to get the data over to it in the format it wanted, which was for the columns a list, and for the data a list of lists. And I had to play this safe game, and see, it's already, I move somewhere and come back, and it's already forgotten my Jinja JavaScript. So again, once it understands what kind of code this is, it looks like it's saying there's an error, but there's not an error. If you move it into make it understood, then it's Jinja and JavaScript. It says, oh, I know what you mean now. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you on this one. Thanks for your attention.